President Biden signed the bill formally ending the national COVID emergency, bringing an immediate end to the program after 3 years. The resolution passed the House despite almost 200 House Democrats voting against it at the White House's urging. Last year, the president claimed he strongly opposed the measure, but came short of committing to actually vetoing it. The end of the health emergency comes just days after a pandemic-era measure prohibiting states from kicking people off Medicaid expired on Saturday, meaning some 15 million Americans are now at risk of being stripped of their health coverage. 2024 presidential candidate Marianne Williamson slammed the rollback on Twitter yesterday. Quote, "Those 15 million live with the rolling emergency of hunger and lack of health care, whether COVID is spiking or not."
Now, just hours after ending the national emergency yesterday, the Biden administration also announced a new $5 billion partnership with Big Pharma, of course, to develop new COVID vaccines and treatments. According to the Post, quote, Project Next Gen, the long-anticipated follow-up to Operation Warp Speed, would take a similar approach to partnering with private sector companies to expedite developments of vaccines and therapies. Scientists, public health experts, and politicians have called for the initiative, warning that existing therapies have steadily lost their effectiveness and that new ones are needed.
First and foremost, I'm a little confused about why the government is trying to trade on Star Trek goodwill with the name of these Big Pharma project collaborations. Warp Speed, Next Generation.
Yeah, I don't like Operation Next Gen. That's not a.
But the main reason I think that people are going to object to Operation Next Gen is because it does feel like another really significant monetary investment, $5 billion, for treatments that so far, since the initial vaccine, have failed to live up to what the expectations were in terms of how they're going to change the management of the pandemic. So there was a lot of hope that updated new boosters would have increased efficacy against new strains. That didn't happen. We were hoping that some version of the boosters would have a stronger effect on ending transmission, which is really the key to stopping the pandemic from spreading. And that didn't actually happen. And now there's this focus, and it might turn out this time, but now there's this focus on these mucosal nasal vaccines, which the hope is that because there's a number of mucosal sites where the vaccine enters your body, that these kind of vaccines will be able to protect against a broader range of varieties.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good theory, but they said the initial vaccines were going to be protective of infection. They said get boosted to help keep cases down. They said all these things that didn't pan out. Look, maybe there are some people who would take it if it was a nasal inhaler. Yeah. I take a nasal inhaler daily for allergies. It really does help, especially as we approach the spring. I take it to build up my protection from spring allergies. It's a lifesaver. It really does help. So maybe the theory is people would take that. They don't like needles. That was a theory some people had earlier on. Honestly, I have a hard time imagining at this point there are people who haven't gotten vaccinated, that there's a lot of people who haven't gotten vaccinated specifically because they just don't like needles. It seems unlikely to me you'll sell them on the idea of vaccination if it's the same mRNA technology, but just a different delivery mechanism. Look, obviously we need, if private industry wants to invent new therapeutics, new things to make us better off, that's all well and good. I am absolutely not for the government standing in the way of progress on that front. But what we're talking about is government funding, and then on the other end, what gets required, because some of this stuff makes its way into the vaccine registry where it has liability protection, what are schools going to require, what are university campuses, which are still requiring the bivalent vaccine, even though there are serious questions about whether it really has any additional protection over the initial shots, without taking into account if you've had COVID, how many times you've had COVID. All of those questions, that we raise here on the show, but nobody else seems to raise.
Sure, yeah, and one of the fundamental contradictions that I'm really struggling with here is the idea that the pandemic is persisting to the extent that the government still needs to be investing significantly in these pharmaceutical products, at the same time that it's going to end the COVID emergency status and basically leave people to the wolves, kicking or allowing 15 million people to be thrown off of Medicaid. Which is it? Is this a persistent issue that needs to be addressed and needs government investment, and 200 Democrats are going to vote against, but you're not going to veto it as President of the United States of America? Or is it this thing that we need to keep investing all of this money in? And I will say, Medicaid being an income-based, not entirely, but a largely income-based program, means that before this pandemic, a lot of people would find themselves, coming into something that, on a short-term basis disqualified them from receiving benefits. And that was why this COVID-era policy was supposed to create some consistency in care. Now, I think there's a legitimate argument that technically some of these COVID-era policies should end on the basis of the kind of like the connection between COVID rates and things like that. But the problem is there were a lot of ongoing systemic issues in this country that predated COVID that aren't going away, that COVID was a temporary balm for, these COVID-era policies were a temporary balm for. And now we have to get back to the business of figuring out how to help some of the poorest, most healthcare insecure people in the country.
And what I will say is, while I'm sure you and I probably disagree on some of these programs and how robust they should be, it is inefficient, it is economically inefficient and destructive to have people eligible and then ineligible and then eligible again. The more paperwork you throw at people, the more you're just being wasteful. You're wasting their time and the time of government employees, frankly.
Yes.
There should be continuity.
Yes.
It should be easy, simple, and available and then we talk about who should be eligible, but stop tweaking it and stop changing it so people lose cover. I mean, some of these people won't realize, because it's confusing what you're covered in for medical. It's the most confusing stuff there is. So you can go to the doctor, find out, oh wait, now I actually have to pay for this. I thought I was eligible. Wait, maybe I'm only eligible here. It's a headache. It's destructive of people's time, which is ultimately like the most finite resource there is. So it is not a good system. So I don't think this is good.
What do you make of Marianne Williamson hopping into the fray here and trying to distinguish herself from a potential Biden candidacy, or potentially the RFK Jr. presidency as well? I'm not sure, what role he would play in this, but certainly a lot of voters are excited about the prospect of his more adversarial relationship to the pharmaceutical industry.
Yes, absolutely. That will certainly be refreshing. Frankly, I think most of the voters who appreciate a political figure having an adversarial relationship with Big Pharma are Republican primary voters at this point. So we'll see how he does, but it is certainly an interesting perspective to get out there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll have more Rising for you after this. Stick around.